Justin Trudeau claims his Liberal government is working for the Canadian middle class. We've heard it ad nauseum since before the last election and throughout the first 20 months or so of his government. But it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that his efforts to make life more affordable for the middle class have either been an outright and inept failure or simply not true. So what new taxes could Justin Trudeau and the Liberals be considering? Well, according to an Access to Information packet briefing for the Environment Ministry, it appears that they are not only going to implement a carbon tax on everything, but are also considering a border tax adjustment in the form of a carbon tariff on imports. This comes as the Liberals are already raising taxes on the very same middle class they claim to help. Payroll taxes are up. They broke their election promise to cut the small business tax. They've just introduced a yearly hike to beer, wine, and spirits taxes, and they're even considering a Netflix tax. But does Justin Trudeau actually care? Well, watch and see for yourself.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister just keeps repeating things that aren't true. They aren't cutting taxes on the middle class, they're raising them. Higher payroll taxes, higher taxes on beer and wine, bus passes, Uber, the carbon tax. But he keeps trying to convince Canadians otherwise. I guess he's taking a cue from the old George Costanza philosophy that it's not a lie if you believe it. Can the Prime Minister explain why he has an economic policy about nothing except hurting the people he claims to help?
All right, Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the last election campaign was fought on two very different visions of the economic growth this country needed. The previous Conservative government had spent its time on boutique tax credits and advantages for the wealthiest 1%, where we knew that Canadians needed real growth that would support the middle class, needed investments in infrastructure that were long overdue, needed the kind of support for a forward-thinking economic and environmental vision that went together. These are the things Canadians asked for. They asked for real change. That's exactly what they got.
Exactly what we got? Wow, Justin, rehearsed talking points in question period aren't convincing anyone. But I gotta say, I'm glad this is a point Andrew Scheer is taking up in his first month as opposition leader, because we know if recent history is any indication, the Liberals are just getting started as far as introducing new taxes that actually harm the Canadian middle class rather than help them. And if this carbon tariff is implemented, it will mean this government not only wants to tax goods manufactured or produced and transported in Canada via their carbon tax, but are now considering throwing another tax on anything entering the country. In what world does this help the middle class? Look, this Access to Information packet is essentially a briefing note for Environment Canada and Catherine McKenna, and it explains that, quote, the goal of a border tax adjustment related to greenhouse gases would be to mitigate impacts on competitiveness flowing from domestic carbon pricing, unquote. So if it's not already taxed under our carbon tax, it'll be taxed at the border. Look, I'm still waiting for the part where this is supposed to help the middle class. Perhaps that is a promise similar to the one where they said that the carbon tax would create jobs. Remember that one? This is also a proposal that could irreparably harm British Columbia's economy. The biggest economic driver in Vancouver is the Port of Vancouver. Almost all consumer goods from Asia flow through either the Port of Vancouver or the Port of Prince Rupert. And if every single item that enters is subject to a new tax in the form of this carbon tariff, that could seriously impact the economic activity that derives from our ports. And with an NDP Green Frankenstein government about to raise carbon taxes here in British Columbia, it would become a double whammy for us. It is also noted in this Access to Information packet that there are international agreements governing these kinds of border adjustment taxes. It states that any new tariff must comply with WTO rules under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which states that a border adjustment tax may only be applied when the charge is equivalent to a domestic tax, like our incoming federal carbon tax. This means the government cannot impose any draconian border tax, but it means as long as there is a domestic carbon tax here in Canada on our domestic producers, that will mean the Liberals, if they feel like implementing this tariff on imports at the same rate, they can, and I'll bet they will. And at the end of the day, that just means more taxes on our middle class and more money out of our pockets. For the Rebel.media, I'm Christopher Wilson. There isn't a tax this Liberal government and Justin Trudeau don't like. So make sure you keep it locked to the Rebel Canada YouTube channel, where we'll expose Justin Trudeau's tax and spend ways.